Well, hello, boys and girls. It's Grumpy Granny, and I'm back to tell you another interesting story from history. And this behind you might give you a little bit of a hint. I'm not going to be particularly talking about the Donald skating rink, but instead I'm going to be talking about the people that created this postcard as a hand-painted one, and the characters that are on the postcard, which many of them are my great aunts and uncles. Now, I've been doing genealogy research on my adopted family and my birth family for years, but this is probably the family that I know the best. And because of that, I'm only going to actually show you one newspaper article, and then I'm going to show you some photos and talk a little bit about the people. And then next time, or maybe not next time, because I believe a particular story has been already requested for next time, but further down the track, I'll come back and tell you some more great stories about this lot. So let's start off with where it all begins. So here we have the postcard. Now, it's quite interesting if you have a look at it, because I'm not sure which one of my great aunts, pretty sure it wasn't one of my great uncles, but one of my great aunts actually drew this. I've got suspicions because some people are standing up and then the rest of them look like they're all falling over at the Donald skating rink, possibly having never skated before. But it's quite funny because if you actually have a look, you can see here that there are names on them. And the names, like that's Percy, my great uncle Percy, Lizzie, my great auntie Lizzie, and then we've got Elsie, who's she's actually my grandmother. Getting myself confused. Oops, went forward too far. Or this Elsie might be my grandmother. Not sure. But anyway, I have gone through this at some stage and picked out all the names and, trying to get a bit of a gauge on which one of them produced this rather great work of art. The thing about this family is that my grandmother and her sisters, now there are 11 in the family. The oldest ones had gotten married and gone off, but there were still quite a few of them left living at home. And it's the younger ones that I'm probably going to talk more about tonight, because they were characters. They had great sense of humour, they did lots of fun things, and really enabled me, even though I vaguely remember some of them. My grandmother had died by the time I was born, and so I didn't ever get to know her personally, but I did get to meet quite a few of her siblings, and I have memories of those. But I didn't get to know them well because I was just a kid and, we'd see them several times a year. Some I did get to know more than others. And it was really when I started doing the genealogy research and started uncovering a lot of the correspondence that was sent between them all. And they were prolific writers and postcard. They would get photos taken and send a postcard of that off. The good thing is that several of those, not just one of the same image, came back to me. I think, 3 or 4 came back to me of the same image with each other's writing on them. So I got to sort of get the full story a little bit. Plus, as it turned out, a lot of their antics got printed in the local newspaper, some of the stories. And that was actually a great way of getting to know them too, because I not only had photographs, but I also had the newspaper articles that went with those photographs. So I actually really did get to know them better. So it all starts here. These are my great-grandparents, and this is Joseph Prentice. He was an Irishman, and this is my great-grandmother Bertha, and she was a German. Well, she was born in Australia, but she was of German descent and lived in a place called Lubeck in South Australia. And she was actually born in the middle of Adelaide town, which was where they lived when they first came to Australia. And just need to adjust my position a little bit better. There we go. That's better. There is a bit of a story about Bertha, how Bertha came to Victoria from South Australia, but that's another big story for another time. So Bertha and Joseph met up in a town called Lubeck. They supposedly got married, on the 11th of December, now I can't remember the exact date, 1875, I believe, and then started having kids. Well, I could never find their wedding certificate. And then later on, came across it by accident when I was looking up someone else's name in the Prentice family, and theirs came up in the search history. What actually happened is, and I did find out later on, that back in the day, the ministers didn't come around a lot of these smaller communities all the time. So if a couple wanted to get married, there was no minister. So what they did was actually have a ceremony and say, yes, I do. And then later on, when the minister came, they were meant to, complete the nuptials. Well, apparently this two didn't. And they didn't end up getting married until after they'd had 11 kids. That, again, is another story for another time. Here it is. These are lovely photos. These are of some of the family, which were taken at Lübeck. So we've got Joseph. Now, if we go back, Joseph was quite a handsome-looking young man, I think, and Bertha wasn't a bad-looking young woman either. And so here we've got Joseph with the two oldest sons, which is Thomas and Arthur, and then we've got the oldest daughters, which is Emily, Elizabeth, and Gertrude. So they were all born over in Lübeck. And then they came over to the Donald area, which is where the story begins. So this is in the front garden of a house just up the street, which is where my great-grandparents made their home and stayed for the rest of their lives and brought up the rest of their children. Well, they brought all the children here, but, the oldest ones, had left home and they still had quite a few left. So here's the family. So we've got Thomas. Now, Thomas was a miner in Western Australia, as it turned out. I had trouble finding his records, but then, did discover that he was in Western Australia mining for many years. And his younger brother Arthur also went with him, so he's the third one. Sadly, though, both Thomas and Arthur died quite young, and it turns out that they obviously had infected lungs from mining and not taking the precautions that we take these days. And yeah, was a bit sad. Thomas did have children. Arthur, unfortunately, was single when he died. So yeah, that was a bit unfortunate, but what do you do? And then we've got Emily Alice and we've got Elizabeth Jane. They both married and had kids. Then we've got Gertrude. Now, Gertrude didn't marry. She remained a spinster all her life and was known as Gertie. And my mother is named after her. My mother's name was Jean Gertrude, and she hated the Gertrude part. Not because she hated only Gertie, but because she hated the name. But they're all named after ancestors, so, there wasn't any getting around that. Then we've got Edith, who married but didn't have children. Now, reportedly, she married Mr. Holt, and Mr. Holt did not want her to have children because he did not want her to spoil her figure. That was the family story. So she didn't ever have children, or did she? Then we've got Elsie Victoria, that is my grandmother, who obviously did marry and have children. Then we've got Olive May, and she married and had one daughter. Well, she had two daughters. One died in infancy, and then Lois, who's my mum's first cousin, but we've always called her Cousin Lois because she was Cousin Lois, and she's probably, out of all the children of the great aunts and uncles, she's the one that I was the closest to and that I knew the best, because she actually was a spinster, but she came up and spent all the Christmas holidays and Easter and all those times that you spend with family. She would often come up here and spend them with us, and she was a bit of a trip. And there's lots of stories to tell about Lois because she served in the army during World War II, and she never ever talked about it, And when we asked her about it, before she'd passed away, she would say, "Oh no, I'm not allowed to talk about that. It's a bit weird, if she was just in the land army or doing an office job." We had no idea. And after she passed away, I received all of her photographic stuff. So slides and photographs and all sorts of things. Thousands. She was a prolific photographer. And there are thousands of photos, but a very lot of photos, hundreds of photos, of her time in Papua New Guinea during World War II, in which time she was doing what we now call secret squirrel business. So she was working in the sort of code breaking and, the hush-hush little areas, which was why, she was under a, secret disclosure during the war, but still never talked about it. Still always felt she had to keep those secrets after the war. So that was quite interesting. Then we have Grace, who also married and have children. We have young Percy. Now, Percy was an interesting character, and he was a musician in his younger days, and he used to actually play the organ at the pictures, during the silent movie days. So, yeah, the whole family was quite musical. Some of them played instruments, but they all sang. And they went around to a lot of concerts and performed a lot, which is also another great way that I got to know them. And then the youngest of the family is Mabel Adelaide, and she also married and had a daughter. So that's just a rough overview. But the one thing which is what I'm going to talk about today, the one thing that I discovered about my great aunts in particular is they liked to dress up and did so on many occasions. Now you'll see here we've got Elsie, my grandmother, and Olive and Gertie in the middle, all dressed up as men. Why, you may ask? Well, they would have planned events or fun things where they got to get dressed up, and they seem to quite enjoy it. Now, I haven't actually tracked down what this one was about, but I'm still scouring newspapers because stuff gets released and, yep, you never know what you're going to find out. I do believe this is prior to Elsie getting married, so I've sort of got a timeline, very likely during the First World War. I also then came across a little bundle of photographs, and this is the first one. So this is Edith, quite obviously dressed in a costume, I thought. Looking very beautiful though, but obviously a costume. And then I found in the same lot of photos Olive, who looks like she's dressed in a postie uniform, and I'm thinking, what the heck? And then we have Gertie dressed up as a Scottish soldier. Now, my grandfather, who married Elsie, Tom Seal, and he was from Scotland. So they had a very big connection with the Scottish heritage, and, that comes into a lot of things. But, yeah, she obviously got her hands on the soldier costume. And then there was this photo, and this is Mabel, and the other lady is Miss Ditchburn, and she was a friend of the family. And so you can quite clearly see that Mabel is dressed up as a minister, parson or such. So that was a bit of fun too. I think that's the end of that lot. So there is one newspaper article I am going to read, so there's only the one. So I'm just going to put that up. So here it is. I'll just bring it down a little bit to start with. Now, virtually the same article. There were two newspapers here in town at the time, and virtually the same newspaper article appeared in both the Donald Times, which is still going today, by the way, and the Donald Express newspaper. But there was one little difference, and I will bring that up for myself. So the little difference was that the Donald Mail had an extra little snippet at the top of their story, and it said, the success of the ladies' evening on Wednesday was largely due to the Mrs. Prentices, who initiated the proposal and did their utmost in connection therewith. So I found it quite exciting because not only did I find these amazing photos, but I also found a quite lengthy newspaper article that told me what those photos were actually about. And then to find out that this evening was, they came up with the idea and they did a lot of work to prepare for it and have it going. And apparently it was a great success. So, yeah, quite exciting indeed. So the article starts, mock wedding, a manless night. Great success. Mr. J. Milburn gains admission, but is severely mauled. Takings of £15. Now, the family was not only very musical, but they were very, they did have lots of fun, but they did have a great faith, and they were members of the Presbyterian Church here, and they were very caring people and very sharing people, and they would do anything to help people that needed it, and they did a lot of community work and, had fundraisers and stuff like that. So, help raise money when that was needed for different things. So the article goes, for the past week, the main topic of conversation among the ladies, at least, was the mock wedding and dance which took place on Wednesday evening last. It was much discussed among the young eligibles of the town, who had the doors closed on them, as in the men. One or two of the old school had a keen desire to gain admission, but had not the pluck to chance the severe handling which was threatened. Mr. J. Milburn, overcome with a feeling of adventure, decided to chance the elements, and acting under a plan he had worked out, he shaved his moustache and donned female attire and presented himself for admission at the entrance door of the hall, and was admitted. However, his career under female garb did not last long. He was captured and mauled unmercifully. His skirt was torn asunder and almost all his apparel was ripped off. My goodness. He vainly appealed for mercy, even offering a substantial monetary consideration for release, but without avail, and he was ejected, a sadder and wiser man. Interviewed later, Mr. Milburn admitted that he had had a bad time. Honestly, that just made me laugh so hard. Mr. Milburn was a friend of the family, so honestly, how funny. So on it goes, the wedding. So it gives you the wedding party. So we've got the bride, who's Mrs. W. Ditchburn, the bridegroom, Mrs. Faulkner, bridesmaid, Miss Lena Kay, train bearer, Miss M. Lutet, best man, Miss D. Lewis, dad was played by Miss E. Barber, the parson, Miss Mabel Prentice, and it goes on. The bride, who looked charming, wore a dress of real lace curtain, usual veil and ostrich feathers, and carried a beautiful bouquet, a cauliflower, and also wore a mouse-eaten necklace, the gift of the bridegroom. I kind of tried to envisage what that was, but yeah, I'm not sure. You makes you think of cheese, but I hope she wasn't wearing cheese around her neck. The bride's gift to the bridegroom was a packet of cigarettes. The bridesmaid was attired in emerald green silk, crinoline style, bunches of faded curls showing beneath the gorgeous flower garden hat. She also carried a card of safety pins, the gift of the bridegroom. So they really went into detail with this mock wedding, as you can see. Many useful presents were received as follows: cigarettes, tins of tobacco, shaving brushes, chewing gum, toilet soap, and tins of cocoa. But as you'll see, in brackets it says, which go to the Soldiers' Comforts Fund. So, whilst they did that, and it was funny that that's the presents they were receiving, they were actually collecting stuff to go into soldiers' comfort packages. Mrs. O'Meara was kept busy selling peanuts and lemonade. The manner in which the ladies conducted themselves as gentlemen was commendable. The music for the dances was supplied by Mrs. Ditchburn, Mrs. L.K., H. Muir, A. Davison, I. Smith, Fee Meyer, D. Wilkinson. Songs were given by all these different people. I won't read them all out. The orchestra was as follows. Drum major, Mrs. A. Mitchell, accordion, Miss L. Petrotti, kettle drum, Miss A. Hearn, triangles, Mrs. L. Ralston and A. Davison, mouth organs, Mrs. M. Lloyd, H. Henderson, B. Jeffs, tambourines, Mrs. E. Petroli and M. McPherson. So what an orchestra was that? A drum major, an accordion, a kettle drum, triangles and mouth organs and tambourines. So just the whole thing just makes me laugh. The evening was one of the most enjoyable yet held in Donald. There was a large attendance and some fine dresses were worn, the makeups being exceedingly good. Following is a list of dresses. Now, I won't go through all of those for you, but there's some quite interesting characters in here, so we'll just pick out a couple. So we've got Mary, Kissable and Sweet, and we've got Theodulphus Septimus Cuddlebum, Rosemary Bush. I think there's a bit of a, slightly risque sense of humour amongst all of this. We've got Suspender, Hold 'em Up, Foamy Billows, Dad, and the Reverend of the thing, the parson, the Reverend Joe Hitchemup. So interesting, isn't it? There was a Chinese Mandarin. We've got Lewis Lemonade, Red Riding Hood, Captain Fire Brigade, a bookie called Soul Green. Someone went as a packet of matches. And then we get down a bit further going. Someone got dressed up as the Donald Mail, which was one of the newspapers. Santa Claus was there. We've got Britannia. We've got a Dutch girl, a Scout girl, a matron, Oriental lady, Japanese lady. Someone dressed up as India, cadet boy, Australia. So it would have been fantastic if there were more photos of the other people to see what they wore to be dressed up as these in these photos. Would be amazing. And here we've got Telegraph Boy, Miss O. Prentice, which is Olive, and we did see her dressed in her outfit as looked like a postman, and well, she kind of is. She's the Telegraph Boy, and on it goes. But look, the list keeps going and going. So there were lots of people. Oh, there's Edith. She was the Irish Colleen in that beautiful costume that she was wearing. Edith. So Miss Edith Prentice. And it keeps going. So there was a lot of people there. But if I go back up here, no, not far enough. I did make myself a note so that I didn't have to read them all out and try and find the right ones. Appears that it's not there. Anyway, so, but you could see the costumes that my great aunts were wearing. And we will remove that. I don't know why the notes aren't showing up. And we'll go back to the photos. So there's Reverend Joe Hitchemup right there. So that whole story, I just loved it. And being able to find the newspaper articles, then to find out it was their idea and they initiated the whole thing, it was, what a great story to have in your family history. I'm just going to show you a few other photos. There's so many of these type of photos. It's hard to get them in really good resolution because, they were tiny little black and white photos like this. But we were lucky that we had someone in the family also that had a camera and liked to take lots of photos. There are so many photos that they have taken of someone else in the family posed in a costume or dressed up in some way. There's some photos in there where they, all got dressed up in Oriental sort of garb, and that sort of thing. But here we can see in the middle is Henry McIntyre. Now, he married Olive, which is the one there, and they're all actually eating watermelon. So they've gone down to where great-grandpa was growing the watermelon, and they've popped themselves down there, and they're sitting there and having a good old munch on. And there, we were lucky someone else took a photo. We also have lots of photos like this where there was some sort of a special occasion, whether it was a wedding or a family get-together. And, it took a lot of working out of some of these as to who these were. But, it's one of those things, I started to get used to their faces. And, I straight away, by the time I found this photo, I realised that several of the girls out of the family were in this photo. So across the bottom, we've got Grace, and then we've got Mabel and Elsie, and they're quite young in this photo. And as it turned out, after I worked this all out, these are actually relatives that lived over in a town further over. So they would have been like their cousins and second cousins in this photo. So, yeah, I'm not sure whether they were at a wedding, but they're all very well dressed up. This is more a young people's group, and there were a lot of photos like this as well, where all the young ones get together. And, the majority of these are the Prentices with their partners of the time, but then there's also some friends in there as well. So we've got Mabel sitting on this side. She's not wearing white, because I think being a bit younger, she didn't wear white. And if you notice, her hair's down and the rest of them have got the hair up. So she was the baby of the family. So she obviously hadn't met her husband or didn't have a beau at that stage. But yeah, we've got Henry McIntyre there sitting in the front looking very swish. He was a very handsome man, I might add. And there's lots of stories to tell about him, because as much as I said his daughter Lois was a great photographer and took lots of photos during World War II, Henry also had lots of photos and stories that we've got that he had from World War I. So there's quite an archive of stuff from them, which is absolutely fantastic. But these sort of photos I love, like they're just natural, they're relaxed. It's just a group of them together. I'd say maybe it was after church, perhaps, or they just decided to all get together. Before I finish off this week, I'm going to give you a teaser. This, my friends, is a pie shop in there behind. Well, yeah, so there was once upon a time a tobacco shop. Then it became a dress shop. Behind the dress shop, well, two of the Prentice sisters ran the dress shop. Behind the dress shop, in what was obviously the kitchen from the original cafe that was there, two others of the Prentice sisters ran a pie shop. They were quite good cooks too, I might add. And the story goes, and if you see that little girl, that little child over in the far side over there, on that side, so that is Lily. The story goes that the mother of Lily dragged her into the pie shop one day, and the Prentice sisters took one look at her and thought, she's not looking after her, we will look after her and take her home and look after her. And so they did. And Lily lived with them until she died. She was a sickly child and a sickly young lady. She died in her very early 20s. She was still living with the Prentice family at that stage, and her name was Lily Bourne. And so there is a big story to tell there, because as much as that was the story that we were all told about Lily, after some time I came across this particular photograph, and wow, these two, if Lily was a bit taller, could be twins, I'm going to say. Also, other people, and it's got it on the back of the postcard, they sent this postcard to other members of the family and with on it saying, who do you think this is? Because so-and-so thought it was Grace and Percy because they thought Lily was Grace. She looked so much like Grace. So I think there's a little bit more to the story than her coming from the pie shop and being, because who basically kidnaps a child off its mother and takes it home and raises it? Who does that? Well, apparently my family does, or did. But I have more evidence on that and more in-depth stuff. I've got letters and some postcards and some other photographs that all pulled my what I think happened together in a story. And that's the Lily Bourne story that I've said before is a very interesting story. So let me know when you want to hear that one. But that's what I'm going to leave you with. And you let me know if you like this style where I don't have any notes at all. I mean, I did read you that newspaper article, but then I just talk. And yeah, what can I say? I know this family so well that I thought I would just put some photos up and talk about them because I have so much knowledge of this family. Even though I didn't get to know them when they were living all that well, I know them so well afterwards from the research that I've done. And it's just, I was so lucky that they left behind so much evidence of their lives in these postcards and that they were prolific in sending them to each other. And I have got quite an archive of those, and I will be bringing those out in future episodes to show you and talk about some of the stories and interesting things that I was able to find out from those, and letters that they sent to each other and stories that were in the newspaper. So yeah, so that's the Prentice girls, and I hope you enjoyed this little story, and I will see you next week with another story from history. Bye now.